One of the fun things about hot coffee, it doesn't show up in the movie, but when they came to interview me, they were talking about what they wanted. They wanted some background film and that sort of stuff. And they found out that we actually in Mississippi have a town called Hot Coffee, Mississippi. So they thought that was really, really interesting. So actually they drove down to Hot Coffee, Mississippi, and just started interviewing folks on the street. They found out one of the interesting things, the only store in the town of Hot Coffee, Mississippi is McDonald's General Store. It's not a McDonald's franchise, but it's called McDonald's General Store. And so they interviewed folks in front of the McDonald's in Hot Coffee, Mississippi. And that all shows up in the actual disc. If you buy Hot Coffee, it's in some of the it's in some of the deleted scenes and that sort of stuff. So that's sort of fun too. But yeah, it was interesting when they came down. John they interviewed because he wrote The Appeal was his book, and when he wrote the book, John had called me while he was writing it. Actually sent me the manuscript and asked me to read it and make a few small corrections to make sure that he had the lay of the land correct as far as the Supreme Court building in Mississippi, what floor the courtroom is on and that sort of thing. But they interviewed him and asked if he sort of got the idea for the book, The Appeal, because of what I had gone through, and he said, yeah, that served as a part of the inspiration for it. So that was sort of a neat connection as well. Lots of folks say, well, how did John know you or write about you in his book? And a lot of people actually don't know. I'm surprised to find out around the country when I'm speaking about Hot Coffee or The Appeal, they don't realize that John had actually served in the Mississippi legislature. Of course, we all know that here in Mississippi, but folks around the country had no idea. And I tell them that John and I served in the Mississippi House of Representatives together. We actually got to be very good friends at the time, and we've stayed in contact over the years. And so he just naturally followed my political career, and I'm glad he's able to make a lot of money off of my political career. It all goes back to 2000. The year 2000 is when, first of all, Governor Musgrove appointed me to the Mississippi Supreme Court in March of 2000. And I had to run for election in November of 2000. This Mike Sullivan, who was on the Mississippi Supreme Court, had died and left vacant the seat. And it gave Governor Musgrove an opportunity to appoint someone for a very short period of time for that seat. He appointed me, but I immediately had to start gearing up for an election if I was going to serve on the court and wanted to stay. And so I did, and we went through the election process and organized our campaign and began running. And right about 2 weeks to 10 days before the election, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce started running these horrible ads about me, saying that I favored drug dealers and all sorts of things like that, and started pumping lots and lots of money into Mississippi, buying lots of ad time. And it was the first time that they'd actually come into the state of Mississippi. And so we were caught totally unprepared at that point, and we had to counter and raise money in order to counter these massive influx of ads that were coming in. We had known how much my opponent raised in that race, and we knew how much I had, and we had budgeted, and we had enough money to counter what we thought they would do and to finish out our campaign. But completely unexpected was the massive amounts of money coming in from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And so we had to scramble to get enough money to cover television time and everything else that you need in a campaign. My election was one of the first ones that they came in, and they actually used the name U.S. Chamber of Commerce in the ads. And so they've gotten around that a little bit. But Mississippi had a law at the time where if you were involved in political campaigns or political ads, you had to disclose where the funding came. And the Secretary of State had filed lawsuit in Mississippi when the U.S. Chamber came in and asked that they cease and desist and that they disclose their funding. It was filed here in federal court in Jackson, and the court here in Jackson ruled that yes, they were violating Mississippi's election laws and that they needed to cease and desist. They immediately appealed to the Fifth Circuit, who overruled the trial court, the federal court here in Jackson, and said that they could continue to run their ads. So it was a little battle at the time in court outside the campaigns. I mean, the state of Mississippi and the federal courts were involved in it for a little while at that point. folks who may not know that after we began the funding to counter the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I had to take out loans from a bank in order to do that. And in order to take out loans, banks generally don't like to loan money to political candidates because they may or may not have enough money to pay them back. So they want somebody on the loan that can actually pay that. And some of my friends and lawyers around the state had pitched in to help counter that. And one of my friends is Paul Miner, who agreed to sign a bank loan to help counter the negative ads that were running. A couple of years after the election, the federal prosecutor, Dunn Lampton, began looking into that and said that he thought that Paul Miner signing bank loans on my behalf was an attempt to bribe me as a Supreme Court justice, that I would somehow rule in his favor on cases that came before us at the Supreme Court, and therefore actually began a federal prosecution of me, which lasted for several years. One of the things that ultimately came out was that I had never voted on anything that Paul Miner, his law firm, or anybody associated with him ever had at the Mississippi Supreme Court. So it was hard to make out a case that I'd been bribed and had done something for him. I had many opportunities. He'd had many cases at the Supreme Court, and I actually recused myself every time. So it just didn't hold up. But it's difficult for the media, I think, to stand back and take a broad look at what's going on while it's going on. I mean, they focus on the fact that a Supreme Court justice has been indicted and is on trial, and they cover the day-to-day goings-on of what's happening in the trial or motions that may be filed in court. But nobody had actually stepped back and take a look and see the whole picture. You know, what's the basis of the prosecution here? We had urged that many times, and I understand limited resources with the media. They don't have the time to do these in-depth type studies, particularly anymore. I mean, in days past they may have, but nowadays they don't. And so I think until really Hot Coffee came out, that nobody had stepped back and tried to look at the broad picture. And you were accused of bribery, but did you ever do anything in return for that? And why would they go through with the prosecution if they ultimately found out that you had never done anything? So it's I don't want to criticize the media too much because it's hard to take a broad picture while it's going on. But I think still to this day nobody's really done a really sort of in-depth look as far as the print media or anything like that of the whole situation.